Hello and welcome to Precon Decon, the video series where I deconstruct the pre-constructed decks of Magic the Gathering's history. In this video we're carrying on with our look at the Onslaught theme decks, and we're going to look at Celestial Assault, which is a white-blue deck. One thing I wanted to mention, which I didn't do in the previous video about Onslaught, is that the packaging has changed on the theme decks. Which I think is for the better. It's gone with this design now where you have the color of the deck shown in these colored circles at the top of the pack. I just think it looks a bit better. This is the packaging I think that gets used all the way up until they get rebranded into intro decks in Shards of Alara. Because up until now, I think the way they were displaying colors of theme decks was kind of like weird border colors on the boxes. I just think this is like a little bit better. But tangents about packaging aside, let's look at Celestial Assault. So we have 17 creatures, 13 instants, 3 sorceries, 3 enchantments, and 24 land, and we have a mana curve off to the side there. So, white and blue deck, which probably means a bunch of flyers and invasive creatures. That is obviously white-blue's strength. And as it is a Onslaught block deck, we're going to have a sort of heavy tribal theme, because that's like the gimmick of the set. So this deck is kind of split between, well, it's all soldiers, but some of them are also birds. And there's some effects that care about birds later on, but we'll look at. So this is, I was going to say this is the core of the deck, but there's not enough of them really to be the core of the deck. This is like a sub-theme of the deck. Let's say that these Gustcloak creatures. Now, I used to really like these Gustcloak creatures. I had like kind of a bit of nostalgic fondness for them because I think some of them got reprinted a few times in some dual decks, and I used to really like the ability that, you know, if they attacked and they were blocked and they were maybe going to die, you could just like untap them, remove them from combat, and like your opponent's wasted a blocker. Or alternatively, you attack with it, your opponent's like, oh, I'm not going to block it because you're just going to remove it, and then it gets through anyway and does damage. So yeah, really like the Gustcloak ability. However, I was looking at it and I was really disappointed because ignore Gustcloak Savior for now, because that's one of the rares of the deck and it's actually pretty good. But the other four, Gustcloak Runner, Gustcloak Sentinel, Gustcloak Skirmisher, and Gustcloak Harrier, they are all basically the same creature, just with slightly different power and toughness, and the Skirmisher and Harrier also have flying. So the Runner's a 1/1 for 1, the Sentinel's a 3/3 for 4, the Skirmisher's a 2/3 flyer for 4, the Harrier is a 2/2 flyer for 3. They have no other abilities apart from, you know, the two bird ones have flying, which is honestly, it's a little bit disappointing. I would have really liked to seen these be a bit more varied, like if they had if some of them had like maybe like first strike or vigilance, or you know, like an attack trigger where like, oh, you know, if they attack, you get some life, which would be like, oh, that's kind of synergy because you attack with them and get the life, and then you remove them from combat. That'd be fun. You know, just stuff like that, just something to make them a little bit more interesting. Because at the moment, they just have the Gustcloak ability, and that's it. They're not really that interesting. Gustcloak Savior is a bit more interesting. That's 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer. It's one of the rares of the deck, and it gives the Gustcloak ability to all your creatures, which is really, really good. You could have some really messed up combats by doing that. You attack with everything, your opponent's like, oh, I don't know what to block. And they sort of block occasionally, and you're just like, well, the stuff that's going to die, I'm just going to remove, and all the stuff you didn't block gets through, and it's fine. And then I've got blockers ready for you on your next turn. So yeah, Gustcloak Savior, really, really good. And the others, still good, but just a little bit disappointing that they're not more kind of varied. They don't have like extra abilities and stuff. But all of them basically fine. So then moving on, so we have some more kind of like, these are just some more like basic soldiers, I suppose. So we have 2 Daru Cavaliers, 4 mana for a 2/2 first strike. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for another one of it and put it into your hand and shuffle. I think for 4 mana that's fine, like a 2/2 first strike that searches up a copy of itself. The only thing I wish is like if there'd just been at least one more of him, because having 2 feels a bit, it's not living up to its full potential, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I suppose this is the thing with deck building in these intro decks. is that it introduces a new player to these cards and then be like, oh wow, this is obviously better if I have more copies of this card in the deck because then it's more consistent. I mean, that's always a thing with these theme decks as well, isn't it? But yeah, I think Daru Cavalier is perfectly fine. Dive Bomber, Bird Soldier, 4 mana for a 2/2 flyer, tap, sacrifice it, does 2 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. Yep, that's fine. I think what's important to note is that that's enough to kill like morph creatures, which are 2/2s. So I think that would have mattered. Like if your opponent was using a lot of morph creatures that they're in range of this ability. Then we have 2 Iron Fist Crusher, so 5 mana for a 2/4 that can block any number of creatures. I think a little expensive at 5 mana, but it has the Morph ability, which means that if you're very new to the game, Morph means that you can play it face down as a creature with basically no types or color for 3 colorless mana, and then you can turn it face up anytime by paying its Morph cost. So not a lot of morph in this deck. There is a deck in the next set which uses morph a lot more, and that's basically when morph gets more interesting. Because in this set where it's introduced, this is kind of like basic morph, where like you just play it face down and you can turn it face up as a surprise. Like this is a like technically a combat trick because you could have it face down, opponent swings everything, you pay your morph cost, flip it over, and like, aha, it's an Iron Fist Crusher, I can block all your stuff. So it's like this kind of surprise factor. Future sets is when you start getting creatures where like when they get turned face up by paying their morph cost, then they have triggered abilities based on that, which is like a lot more interesting. But yeah, it's always nice to see like in these blocks when like a mechanic is introduced in the first set and then it's explored and expanded on in the further sets, which is like it's always disappointing to me. This is a bit of a tangent, but it really disappoints me we don't have blocks anymore. Normally we just get like a set, and it's you get a bunch of potentially really interesting mechanics introduced, and then that's it, and then we're done with that set and we're moving on. We don't have this thing now of like where a mechanic is introduced and we stick with it for a while and see how it could be used and explored, which is it's just disappointing. I suppose the closest thing we've had recently is like the modal dual face cards, which I think were in Zendikar, Kaldheim, and Strixhaven. But yeah, it's I don't know, just disappointing to me. And then we have a single Pearl Spear Courier. Let's get back on to talking about these actual cards. 3 mana for a 2/1. You can choose not to untap him during your untap step. You can pay 3 and tap him. As long as he's tapped, target soldier gets +2/+2 and has vigilance. So there's a cycle of these couriers. Basically, you can choose not to untap them, but if you pay their ability, you give a creature of a certain tribe +2/+2 and like a keyword ability. This one's okay. Giving +2/+2 in vigilance for 3 is okay. I think maybe a tiny bit overcosted. At 3 mana and only targeting a specific creature type, maybe, and also like maybe potentially like leaving him tapped down. I think it's okay. I think it's okay. I think like +2/+2 in vigilance is a fine buff. It'd be more interesting if it was +2/+2 and untap the creature, but then that wouldn't work with you leaving him tapped. Anyway, basically fine. And then we have a couple of birds. So we have 2 Ascending Avens, 4 mana for a 3/2 flyer, can only block other creatures with flying, and it has morph. This is fine. I typically don't really like high flying creatures like this, but they typically have higher power as to compensate for the drawback of not being able to block. So I think 4 mana for a 3/2 flyer is okay at this time. And so it's got morph as well, so you could have it on the ground if you needed to block or whatever. And 2 Screaming Seahawks. So this is basically the blue version of Daru Cavalier. You play it and it searches up a copy of itself. 5 mana though for a 2/2 flyer is I think very expensive, even if it is searching up a copy of itself. So not too wowed by this one, and also again it has the Daru Cavalier problem where like you've only got 2 of them in the deck, so like a little bit disappointing. I think it would have been fine at 4 mana, like maybe 2 colours and 2 blue, like the Ascending Aven. And then on the subject of birds, we have 2 Airborne Aids, so it's 4 mana for a sorcery. Draw a card for every bird in play. So that counts your opponent's birds as well, which is like could potentially be a nice little upside. This is, I think, the first of the like distant melody effects where you choose a creature type and you draw cards equal to that creature type. I think it's okay. You probably want to, at that cost, you probably want to be drawing at least 3 of this to get a good deal off it, though. But yeah, fine. The only problem is like in this deck, you've got a lot of soldiers, but you don't have as many birds. I think you've got what, maybe 7 or 8, which is, I mean, it's just fine. I guess it's okay. And then we have a Seaside Haven, continuing on the bird theme. So it's a non-basic land, taps to give you colourless, or you can pay 1 white and 1 blue, tap it, sacrifice a bird to draw a card. That's fine. If you have a bird that's going to die to removal anyway, 2 mana and sacrificing it is fine. Yeah, it's basically okay. Then we have a bunch of white spells here. So we have a single Acronis Blessing, 3 mana for instant. Creature you control get protection from a color of your choice till end of turn. I think that's very strong. Potentially breaks like a stalemate where you get protection for your opponent's whole board and you just swing with everything, or they're attacking you. You play this and block all their stuff with no repercussions. It does also have cycling for only a single white. So if you for some reason couldn't find a use for it, you could just pay the cycling cost, draw a card. I think you'd want to keep hold of this one though and play it rather than cycle it. But it's always nice to have the option, I suppose. We have a single defensive maneuvers. This is kind of garbage. So 4 mana instant. So creatures of the type of your choice get +0/+4 until end of turn. So, I mean, obviously that's going to be soldiers when you play it. But again, it is a symmetrical effect. It does affect opponents' creatures as well. So if there is a mirror match, you would just be better off not playing this. But 4 mana just to only boost toughness, and for a single creature type, is like, that's just not very good at all. I think that's a pretty weak card. 2 in spirits, 3 mana. Untapped target creature gets +2/+4 to end of turn. So this is kind of like a Savage Surge. We see like a lot of these green pump spells in recent sets where it's like gives +X/+X and untaps, and they're usually pretty cheap. So this one's actually okay. I think it's maybe like one of the first examples of that kind of combat spell. Just surprise untap something and give it like a pretty hefty buff. So yeah, I think in spirit's all right. Yeah, pretty decent card. Pretty decent combat trick. Then we have 2 Piety Charms. Single white mana for an instant, and you get 3 options. You can destroy an aura attached to a creature, or give a soldier +2/+2 to end of turn, or your creatures get vigilance until end of turn. So all 3 of those options I think are perfectly good. All good as options. It's either a buff spell or utility to destroy a spell, or destroy an aura, or a really good board-wide buff, so you can just swing with everything and still have blockers in the next turn. So yeah, I think Piety Charm is all right. So the other rare of the deck is Oblation, which is a weird choice because like it's like a good card. Well, it's not good. It's okay. It's okay. It definitely had like a period of time in, I think, Commander. Because it's like one of these tuck cards, like so old Commander rules where like if your Commander went into your deck, that was it, you were screwed. Whereas like later rules updates have been like if your Commander would ever go anywhere, other than the battlefield, you can put it back into the command zone, that kind of thing. But yeah, this is kind of like a weird card. So 3 mana for an instant. The owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into their library, and then they draw 2 cards. So I mean, I suppose I could say this has utility, that you could use it on your own stuff if you needed to. I don't know, if you desperately need to draw 2 cards at instant speed. Obviously stops, like maybe big creatures well on your opponent's side, but is it worth giving them 2 cards? Like these kind of like white compromise spells where you get to you do something that affects your opponent, but then they get something back. Yeah, it's just a weird card, I feel, to include as one of the rares because you look at this theme deck from like a new player's point of view, they maybe see this and be like, oh, I don't really want my opponent to draw cards, but then I also don't want to shuffle my own things back into my library. So feels like a weird choice, basically. So let's move on. Let's look at Sunfire Bombs. 3 mana, instant. Prevent the next 4 damage that would be dealt to target creature or player this turn, and you can cycle it for 2. But when you cycle it, you can prevent 1 damage. So it's nice that there's, in this block, there's cycling cards that still have an effect when you cycle them. I think that's like quite a nice design choice. But I mean, ultimately, this is still pretty weak. Like damage prevention is usually quite a weak effect, especially when it's like a numerical like set value like this. Typically, when you do a damage prevention effect, you want to just prevent all damage, not just like a little bit of it. Yeah, so kind of a bit weak. 2 unified strikes, 1 white mana instant. Exile target attacking creature if its power is less than or equal to the number of soldiers on the battlefield. This is okay. You've got a lot of soldiers. 1 white mana to exile an attacking creature is pretty good, I think. A few hoops to jump through because obviously they've got to be attacking and you've got to have a decent number of soldiers out. But yeah, I think this is perfectly fine, honestly. And then 2 sand skins, so this is basically just like a white version of Gaseous Form. 3 mana aura, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by enchanted creatures. So this has some utility. You can put it on one of your creatures to make them a potentially like really good blocker. This on the Iron Fist Crusher would be pretty hard for an opponent to get through. Or you put this on an opponent's creature, a big flyer or something, or a big trampler, and then it can't do anything. Sand skin's okay. And then just, I think finishing off here with some blue spells. So 2 Mage's Guile, 2 mana instant, give a creature Shroud until end turn. Yeah, that's good. It's got cycling, but again, I feel like this is a card you would want to cast rather than cycle most of the time. But yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. A single medal, 2 mana instant. If target spell has only 1 target and that target is a creature, change the target to another creature. Yeah, it's just like redirect. A redirect effect. Again, I think it's fine. Potentially bounce like burn or kill spells back at an opponent, stuff. Yeah, it's fine. Single Essence Fracture, 5 mana sorcery, return 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. Very expensive for that effect, I think, especially at sorcery speed. It has cycling, I suppose, but the cycling is really expensive as well. Because that was the thing in this. Because normally in Urza's where we first had cycling, cycling was always just like just 2 generic mana, and now like in this set we've got like cycling at like different costs and stuff. So I'm not sure why this one has cycling at 3 mana, but it's just a very expensive bounce spell. And on the subject of very expensive bounce spells, Dispersing Orb, so 5 mana enchantment. 3 colors, 1 blue. Sacrifice a permanent. Return target permanent to his hand. So you've got a repeatable source of bounce here, but the cost is so high to use it. Like 4 mana and sacrificing a permanent is that's a fairly big cost. It is return any permanent. You can return lands with this to potentially set an opponent back if you wanted to do that. But I don't think this is very good. Like I think that's a very expensive cost, even for like repeatable bounce, which is that's obviously a very strong effect. But that cost, I think, is you wouldn't want to pay that more than once or twice. I don't think it's not like you've got. It's not like you're playing a deck with loads of tokens that you can really like benefit from that. Yeah. So what could have been? So overall, I think, despite me sort of like maybe complaining a little bit towards the end there, I think the deck is basically okay. Yeah, that doesn't mean there couldn't be some changes to it. I think mostly I talked about like some cards just having more copies of themselves, like the Daru Cavalier or the Seahawk maybe. But there's a few cards in here I'm surprised. Yeah, that could have been here that I'm surprised weren't. Catapult Squad is this creature that benefit you untap soldiers to do damage to an attacking or blocking creature. I think that's all right. Righteous Cause would go super well with the Gust Cloaks, because it's enchantment. Whenever a creature attacks, you get 1 life. So with the Gust Cloaks, you can just attack with them, get your life, and then untap and remove them, but you've still gained the life. So I think that would be fine. Also, again, it's when it's a symmetrical effect. So it's when your opponent's creatures attack as well, so you get the life from them attacking, which can sometimes be a deterrent. Whipcorder, I think, would have been fun. Just a creature with a tap ability. Like tap abilities, I think are always very good. For locking down big creatures. He's weirdly a rebel, and I don't know why. It's like the first, I think, post Mercadian Masks rebel, and I have no idea why he's a rebel. And then one of the other potential rares, I love this guy. He looks like Sam the Eagle from Muppets. Avon Brigadier. So he's a bird soldier, and he gives buffs to birds, and he gives buffs to soldiers. He's basically perfect for this deck. And it really, like, I would have loved to see him in this deck rather than Oblation, because I just don't think Oblation really does anything well in this deck. Avon Brigadier would have been fun, but also like 3 white mana in his cost is like pretty prohibitive in a 2-color deck. But he benefits both tribes that are in this deck. Like, it seems like an absolute like shoe-in. But anyway. So overall, I think this one's okay. I'll be honest. Blue white is actually like my least favorite color combination, so I'm always going to be like, oh, blue white's a bit boring because all it does is, like kind of just flying creatures and evasive creatures, and it does a bit of soft control options. This one looks okay. It looks a lot more aggressive, obviously, with the soldiers and like flying creatures. It's got some nice cards in here, a few stinkers, but overall I think like it's okay. It's middle of the road. It's a solid C plus in my opinion. But what's your opinion after looking at the deck list? Did you own this deck? Did you play it? Did you make changes to it? What are your thoughts after seeing the deck list? Stick a comment below, and let me know. But I'll be back next time. I'm going to look at another Onslaught theme deck. But until then, thank you for watching and listening, and have a good day.